No quarterback has been sacked more than Caleb Williams this season. Some of that is because of a bad Chicago Bears offensive line, and some of it is from a rookie quarterback holding onto the ball too long and taking too many unnecessary hits.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On the show today, we look at the blame here for all of the Bears' sacks. When you have this many, it's certainly not all on one party or another. It can't all be offensive line, and it certainly can't all be quarterback either. But we'll take a look at some of the different charts and numbers that have been circling around Bears' social media lately, that some of which is structured funny and a little bit out of context, but we'll take a look at some of the different areas that sort of explain this here. We'll look at Caleb Williams and how long he does hold on to the ball and how much he scrambles around and how much of a factor that plays. We'll also look at how much of a factor just, bad offensive line play, also important here. And maybe we'll try and dispel some misconceptions surrounding this whole debate over how much blame Caleb Williams deserves for all of these sacks. Because the thing that's been going around on Bears social media lately is a chart, and it's a great chart. I give credit to Stephen Patton, is a guy on social media who does some analytics and stuff, and he uses some fantasy points data to look at which quarterbacks or for each quarterback's sacks, what percentage of those sacks are they deemed responsible for. So like, it's a percentage of sacks as opposed to like a total number. Obviously, Caleb has been sacked the most, and so of course he's going to have the most number of sacks he's responsible for. But as a proportion of the number of times he is sacked, how often is it that quarterback's fault? And that's the chart that's been going around, Bears Twitter and social media. And of course, because Caleb Williams has the most sacks in the NFL, he's at the top of the list. It's ordered by the number of total sacks. So it's Williams and then Stroud and then Darnold and Geno Smith, et cetera, because those are the quarterbacks that have been sacked the most. And I think part of the problem here is that when Caleb Williams is at the top of the list here, and you see Caleb Williams has been responsible for 45% of the sacks he has taken this season. Sacks that are his fault because he was holding onto the ball too long, or it was longer than the offensive line should be expected to block, or he scrambled away from the pocket and then ended up taking a sack at the end of the play where it wasn't because one offensive lineman got beat, but it was so much later in the play that the quarterback is responsible for that sack being on him. And 45% seems like a high number. That's almost half. Oh my goodness, almost half of Caleb Williams' sacks are his fault. Wow, that must explain the whole problem here. But if we take a second to dig just a little bit deeper into the chart and the numbers and the ideas here, you can kind of get a better sense of where the more complete truth lies. So yes, Caleb Williams has been sacked more than any other quarterback, and he is charted as it being his fault on 45% of his sacks. That's bad. I mean, we can all agree there. He shouldn't be sacked this much. He's taking too many sacks, and he plays a role in what the numbers say is 45% of those sacks, and he can do more than to get that number down so that, ideally, the majority or, a larger and larger portion of his sacks are not his fault, right? You want it, in that case, to be the offensive line's fault, to feel like the quarterback is doing everything he can to avoid those sacks. But when you look a little bit closer here, okay, 45%, among all the quarterbacks on the chart, at least, like the ones who are starting players or have played enough snaps to qualify so far, over the course of this season, Caleb Williams ranks 11th in that stat. That 45% is the 11th highest. It's not the highest. It's not even in the top 10 of quarterbacks who are the highest percentage of sacks that are the quarterback's fault. Number one is Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams. at over 70% of the sacks he's taken this season have been assessed as his fault. Caleb's at 45%. Matthew Stafford is at 70. It's over 70% on that list. I'll go through the top 10 really quickly. Matthew Stafford, Cooper Rush, Will Levis, Geno Smith, Justin Herbert, Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, CJ Stroud, Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield. Those are all quarterbacks who are responsible for a higher percentage of their own sacks than Caleb Williams. And yet, we don't really hear a lot of people saying, oh man, Geno Smith holds onto the ball too long. Justin Herbert holds onto the ball too long. Josh Allen holds onto the ball too long. They must be bad quarterbacks. They're no good. Matthew Stafford. You ever hear people say Matthew Stafford holds onto the ball too long? Like Matthew Stafford takes too many sacks? That's not a narrative that exists for a lot of these other quarterbacks. Maybe some of them, but not a lot of these other quarterbacks who all are responsible for a higher percentage of their own sacks than Caleb Williams. Like Williams' situation here is it's a little bit blown out of proportion because there are so many of them, but it's not as though Caleb is responsible for some insane amount of them. I think we mix up the scariness of the volume of the sacks he's taken with sort of the rate of the sacks he's taken. Like all of a sudden he's some huge problem for taking all these sacks when no, he's responsible for maybe slightly above average amount of sacks, but not some disastrous amount where it's like, holy crap, Caleb Williams has some huge problem here where he's at fault for all the sacks the Bears are taking. He had 45%. Okay, like that's not a small portion here, but it's not top of the league. There are many quarterbacks with significantly more than Caleb Williams. It's not the sole smoking gun of the problem here. Like I think it can still be true that yes, Caleb Williams does hold on to the ball too long, and I want to get into that here in a little bit. Caleb Williams has a propensity to allow pressure to turn into sacks more than other quarterbacks. Those are true statements, and we can talk about why that is and what that looks like, and we will in a little bit here. But I just want to make sure, like on the front end, that we know that he's not responsible for some inordinate amount of his own sacks. He is responsible for some of them, and that's a valid criticism, but like the offensive line is still doing a lot of the damage there. And it's not even purely just like all the other sacks are purely offensive line. Some of it can be play calling and game planning, right? Where it's like, okay, if you get blitzed and there's more blitzers than pass rushers and he sacks the quarterback in 1.5 seconds, like I don't think that's Caleb's fault for not getting rid of the ball in 1.5 seconds, but it's not the offensive line's fault if there was no one there to actually block him, right? There's other blame you can assign between, that's not just Caleb or not just offensive line. It's not a black and white sort of argument there. But I just want to make sure that so many people are getting carried away with the Caleb Williams sack thing, especially because of, this chart and this data that we're talking about here, that I want to make sure we're all kind of on the same page of like, okay, yeah, it's a problem, but it's not like the big disaster problem. Like, yes, he does hold on to the ball a little bit too long, and I think it's only in specific situations. And I think there's some other aspects of this that I want to get into, like specifically Caleb's brand of like, okay, then he's not like the Caleb isn't responsible for all the sacks. So like, what is the real problem here then? Like, yes, he does hold on to the ball a little bit too long, and there's more he can do in that regard, but also the offensive line is going to be a big part of this problem as well. So we'll kind of look at the different sides of this and how we get to Caleb Williams having so many dang sacks all season here next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by Rocket Money. I love Rocket Money because it's helped me find those subscriptions you forget about and cancel them so that you're not having that money come out of your account each and every month. There's a few that you don't even realize that you're paying for, and Rocket Money makes it super easy to track them down. It's kind of like having a little personal assistant for your finances. I have the Rocket Money app on my phone. I've been using it for months now. Even before they started sponsoring this podcast, I was using the Rocket Money app. So I'm super glad to have them on board with us here because it helps you monitor your spending, and even they'll lower your bills. They'll negotiate for you so that you can grow your savings. It brings everything together all in one place, whether it's subscriptions or your spending habits or even the financial goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has helped members save a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions. I like it too because it'll flag large purchases and make sure, like, hey, did you mean to buy this? And it'll categorize them so you can see what you're spending your money on and how your income and spending compares month to month. It's really, really handy, and it doesn't take a lot of setup or a lot of work on the front end. The app does all of the hard work. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on. That's ROCKETMONEY, rocketmoney.com/locked-on. rocketmoney.com/locked-on. Caleb Williams contributes to the high sack total. He is not the sole blame for the high sack total, but there are things he can do as a quarterback to help reduce that. But I don't think it's necessarily as simple and straightforward as people might think or want it to be, because it's not as simple as he holds onto the ball too long, he just needs to throw the ball quicker, because that's not exactly the case. It's a little bit more nuanced than that, because when you look generally, like, okay, there's a lot of, we're getting so much better at measuring quarterbacking now. PFF and other places have data where they track how long it takes the quarterback from the time the ball is snapped to the time he throws it. Or in this case, the time to throw stat. Really, it's not just throws. It's from the time ball is snapped until he either throws it, is sacked, or scrambles beyond the line of scrimmage. Right, until the quarterback's time with the ball behind the line of scrimmage is done. That's covered in the entire sort of time to throw stats from the snap of the ball until the action of the quarterback doing something with that ball. And overall, Caleb Williams has the 6th longest time to throw in the NFL among quarterbacks this season. That's too high. Like, yes, he does have the too long of an average time to throw, and particularly, when he's blitzed, he holds on to the ball too long. He's got the 2nd highest time to throw against the blitz. But I think there's a particular slicing of this that tells the story a lot more clearly than to me than just 6th highest TTT. He holds the ball too long, because when you start to slice it down into some of these different situations, when Caleb Williams is under pressure, he has the 2nd highest time to throw, 2nd longest average time from the ball being snapped to him either throwing it or taking a sack or scrambling beyond the line of scrimmage. On plays when he's not under pressure, when he's kept clean, his time to throw is 17th highest. It's essentially average. It's not, Tua Tagovailoa fast, but on plays when he drops back in the pocket, the offensive line holds up, and he throws the ball, on average, he's getting rid of the ball at an average speed. He's not holding the ball. He's not holding on to the ball too long on those plays. It's not taking him too long to go through a progression and find a receiver here. It's the plays once he gets under pressure that then the length of time he's holding the ball goes up. Like, his time to throw, this idea of holding onto the ball too long, becomes inflated because he's under pressure. And so now he's escaping, right? He's running away from the pocket. He's trying to avoid the sack and get out and be able to still find a receiver downfield on those plays when he's under pressure. The plays take longer for him to do something with the ball because the pressure delays his ability to throw it or to get past the line of scrimmage or whatever it's going to be. Like, the pressure is what lengthens his time to throw, because when there's not the pressure, his time to throw is fine. He's not sitting there taking all day and then, pressure shows up here. Like, on plays where he's kept clean, the pressure, on plays where he's kept clean, the time to throw is low. Like, the problem here is that once the pressure comes, what he does with it. That's the specific distinction here. So when we talk about holding on to the ball too long, it's not like he's being too picky going through his progressions and just needs to throw the first receiver because otherwise he's getting himself into trouble by holding onto the ball too long. I think it's the other way around, that they make him hold the ball too long when the pressure starts coming quickly, as opposed to he's holding the ball too long and that's what allows the pressure to come in. Because I think if he was holding the ball too long, his time to throw when he was kept clean would be higher, because he would still be trying to hold the ball even though there's no pressure on him in the pocket. But it's not, because he normally can get rid of the ball with at least like a league average sort of speed there. He's never going to be the super quick release kind of guy. That's not the style of quarterback that he is. But he clearly isn't holding onto the ball too long on plays where the offensive line doesn't allow pressure. And that's where we really get to some of the heart of the issue here with Caleb Williams, right? It's he trusts so much his ability to escape. And we've seen so many times the Houdini act that he can pull. We've seen him somehow escapes the sack, somehow gets out of the pocket, somehow either scrambles beyond the line of scrimmage or finds an open receiver downfield, and you're like, wow, like it's what makes Caleb Williams special, but it's also contributing to the number of sacks he's taking because he's finding that his escapability isn't quite as fine-tuned in the NFL as it was in college. In college, I mean, he got away with it seemingly every time. In the NFL, he gets away with it sometimes, but less of the time. There's not really I wish there was a good like stat to measure that. I mean, I guess quarterback missed tackles would be part of it, but sometimes it's not actually a missed tackle. He just kind of spins around and runs away in the right way. But I think that's sort of at the core of this is like when the pressure comes, that's when he's holding on to the ball too long. That's when he's trying to do a little bit too much here. Because it's complicated because you could say, okay, well, so then Caleb Williams just needs to throw the ball away more, right? Like if when he's under pressure, he's taking too many sacks, that means he just needs to throw the ball away more, right? Well, he leads the NFL in throwaways when he's under pressure. No quarterback has thrown more balls away while under pressure than Caleb Williams this season. So it's not as though it's not something he's doing. He leads the NFL in throwaways in all situations. I was just trying to double check that before I said it on the podcast. But yes, no quarterback has thrown the ball away more than Caleb Williams this season. He is throwing it away a bunch. I think there is still room to throw it away even more just because of what the offensive line is doing. But I think one of the other things I want to see from Caleb is like see him be more decisive as a scrambler with his escapes. Because like I think so often he escapes the sack. He escapes the first guy and then like turns back into the pocket. Like he's still trying to hang around. And I don't think I don't think he can afford to keep trying to keep eyes downfield and sidestep that sack, eyes downfield, run away from that guy, eyes downfield. Like I'd like to see Caleb just go, just scramble, just take off. At least start getting closer to the line of scrimmage a little bit more. We've seen Caleb scramble a decent amount this season. I believe he's tied with a couple quarterbacks for the second most scrambles of any quarterback this season, but he's scrambling at a lower rate than a lot of other quarterbacks. When Caleb Williams is under pressure, he scrambles about 11, 12% of the time, which is like half as much as Jaden Daniels. When Jaden Daniels is under pressure, he scrambles 26% of the time. Maybe that's too much, but like if you think about a lot of the other mobile quarterbacks, like I was looking at the quarterbacks who've scrambled the most this season, Jaden Daniels, Brock Purdy, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson. Those quarterbacks all scramble at a higher rate than Caleb Williams when they're under pressure. And I'd like to see Caleb at and we see him occasionally get to this, but I just like to see it more where it's like, hey, listen, like when the offensive line is totally broken down, I know you can see that Rome Odunze is about to get open, so you're trying to just buy them that extra second so you can fire the ball down there. Just take off and get 3 yards with your legs. You know what I mean? Or you get up to the line of scrimmage, then you can throw it away, but like throw it away on your way to the line of scrimmage. You don't have to make 3 guys miss. Just go. Just take off. It's okay. You don't need the big play every single time there. The scramble can be the equivalent of a check down there. It's 3 yards, but that's better than 0 yards, and that's better than minus 10 yards on the sacks that the team ends up taking there. Like I want to see Caleb Williams scramble more because again, like I don't think it's purely a holding on to the ball too long. It's what he does with the length of time that he's holding on to the ball. He can have a higher time to throw and throw it away even more, and the sacks aren't that big of a problem, right? To me, it's not about exactly how long he's been holding on to the ball. It's that when he holds on to the ball, he ends up taking sacks at the end of those plays. Like one of the other stats that's out there, it's how often when a quarterback is under pressure, does that pressure result in a sack? They call it pressure to sack percentage. And only Will Levis has a higher pressure to sack percentage than Caleb Williams. About 30% of the time, when Caleb Williams is under pressure, that ends in a sack. That's on him. That's about where the blame is. And that's because he's trying to escape, but his head's in the right place. He's trying to do the right thing and trying to make a play for his team. He's not an idiot. He's not out there thinking, oh, shoot, I forgot to get rid of the ball. Dang it, I shouldn't have taken that. It's like he's trying to make a play. because his team's terrible and his offense can't score points. But like at some point, he's got to live to fight another day there and just kind of take more throwaways, take more scrambles, whatever you need to do to not take those sacks and not take those hits, because the offensive line isn't making it easy on him. And that's another big part of this conversation. The offensive line. We talk so much about, Caleb's fault, not Caleb's fault. It's clearly an offensive line problem. Not 100% an offensive line problem, but an offensive line problem nonetheless. So we'll kind of take a look at where some of the O-line pass protection issues have been popping up and how that might shape what the Bears need to do this offseason with that group next on Locked On Bears. Caleb Williams is responsible for some of the sack issue, but you cannot have this conversation without acknowledging how poorly the offensive line has done in pass protection this year. Like and I think too often everyone, like not everyone, but there are a lot of detractors out there that want to just, it's all Caleb. The offensive line's not that bad, because look at, you can find a lot of different statistics that measure very specific things and then take that and apply it to a broader context to support your argument. And I mean, sure, we all do that. That's how sports talk and debate works. But like, you can find numbers that put the Bears offensive line a little bit closer to average than disaster here. And I think some of those measure different things than what people are arguing them to be. But nonetheless, the Bears have an offensive line problem. No one can argue clearly that they have a good offensive line. It's just a matter of how bad they are compared to how much of that's Caleb Williams' fault. Like that's the central core debate here. And I think it's worth keeping in mind that like this last game against the Seattle Seahawks, think about the offensive line lineup that played that game. Left tackle Larry Borum, left guard Jake Curhan, center Coleman Shelton, right guard Matt Pryor, right tackle Darnell Wright. When you really think about it, like, yes, we've seen, Shelton's been the starter all season, and Matt Pryor's pretty much been the starter all season. The Nate Davis thing has kind of been laid to rest. But you've got backup left tackle, backup left guard, who maybe would kind of be third string left guard, because if everyone was healthy, maybe in a real world, Curhan wouldn't be the first choice there. Ryan Bates might be there. I mean, Borum might even be their first choice at left guard. But regardless, you for sure have two backups on the left side of your offensive line. That's already a problem. But when you think back to the beginning of training camp this year, all the way back to the end of July, when we'd just gone through the offseason, the Bears signed their free agents, made their draft picks, et cetera, et cetera. Do you remember what the plan was for this Bears offensive line? Like day one of training camp, the starting lineup for this offensive line was, of course, Braxton Jones at left tackle, Tevin Jenkins at left guard, Ryan Bates at center, Nate Davis at right guard, Darnell Wright at right tackle. So from the group that you started training camp with as your intended starters to now, you have one starter still in that offensive line. Darnell Wright at right tackle is the only guy who started against the Seahawks who was supposed to be your first choice as a starter this season. The plan was for Nate Davis to start at right guard all year. The plan was for Ryan Bates to start at center all year. Coleman Shelton was your backup center. Matt Pryor was your backup right guard. Realistically, against the Seattle Seahawks, the Bears have 4 backup offensive linemen starting. Like, how much can you really expect from that group? You know what I mean? That's a big part of this too. Like, we can acknowledge, hey, this offensive line is bad. This offensive line is injured, and that makes Caleb Williams' job that much more difficult, because like it's hard to look around this line and the Bears pass protection as a whole and find a lot of stability. The spot where it's like, oh, okay, well, at least like I think Darnell Wright at right tackle is kind of literally it at this point, where you're like, okay, he'll get beat sometimes. Every offensive lineman gets beat sometimes. Darnell Wright's not perfect, but like you kind of know, okay, that's pretty settled. He can handle that side of the ball just fine. Everywhere else has been a problem here. Like if you look at the Bears offensive linemen who has allowed all these different sacks for Caleb Williams. Matt Pryor has allowed 7 sacks this season. Larry Borum, who's only started a handful of games, but at multiple positions. Larry Borom has allowed 6 sacks this season. Darnell Wright's also allowed 6, but he's been on the field for every snap. Like, there's a big difference between Wright being out there every game and every snap and allowing a few sacks, and Larry Borom filling in every once in a while and allowing the same number of sacks as your every single down player at right tackle. Braxton Jones has allowed 5. Tevin Jenkins has allowed 4. Coleman Shelton has allowed 3. Cole Kmet, your tight end, has allowed more sacks this year than any other tight end in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus. Cole Kmet has allowed 3 sacks, the same number as Coleman Shelton on the interior. Like, it's a problem here across the board. It's a group of largely inconsistent players playing a significant amount of snaps. Like, Matt Pryor should not be a starting offensive lineman in the NFL. He could be a very good backup. We talked about that last week on the podcast, but like, the Bears are relying on him as a starter every single week. That's the plan. They don't have a better option for them right now. Like, that's part of the problem here. You know, Larry Borom has had to fill in at both tackle spots and both guard spots, it feels like, over the course of the season. Like, that's a tough thing to ask any player to do, and we kind of know Larry Borom is not a starting caliber offensive lineman in the NFL. That's why the Bears have used multiple draft picks to replace him at offensive tackle. But he can be an okay backup, but again, you're relying on a couple of okay backups as starters right now, and that's a real problem. And then you got Tevin Jenkins constantly in and out of the lineup. Now Braxton Jones out of the lineup, and Coleman Shelton in the interior is only giving up 3 sacks. You know, okay, he's still giving up a lot of pressure, and that sometimes the pressure that one player allows then drives the quarterback into a sack that was allowed by another player. So like, the pressure might come because Coleman Shelton got beat, but then Darnell Wright's guy finishes the play with the sack. And so Coleman Shelton doesn't give up the sack per se, but his poor pass blocking resulted in a sack for the Bears offense there. Like, and it's those plays that Caleb Williams then ends up holding onto the ball too long. I mean, these things all sort of cascade with each other here. And it's such a universal across the board offensive line problem here, and such a problem that you leave your tight end Cole Kmet in to block, and that doesn't solve it either. And the Bears running backs have not been great in pass protection either. Like, there just aren't a lot of options for trying to fix that thing on the fly. So I think like this is an issue that just kind of compounds each other. Okay, so it's like if the problem was only, oh well, when Caleb's under pressure, he holds onto the ball too long and extends those plays and makes poor choices. Okay, that's one thing to be able to try and address. But when it's your offensive line gets beat a lot, and then when the offensive line gets beat, Caleb makes it worse after they've already been beaten. Like, you've got a problem up front making a worse problem behind it, and then the problem behind it worsens the problem up front. Like, it sort of feeds each other in this sort of toxic back and forth that leads to Caleb Williams leading the NFL in sacks and approaching a potential record in NFL history for most sacks in a season. And it's a miracle at this point that he hasn't been more significantly injured from all the hits the Bears have been, that he's been taking, that either the offensive line has allowed or that he has put himself in position to take. But man, it has been a beating for Caleb Williams. And it's why some people are debating, you know, for week 18 against the Green Bay Packers, I mean, is it even worth putting Caleb out there at this point? Or would you rather just say, hey, you were 4-12, start Tyson Bagent, protect Caleb Williams, put him in bubble wrap and put him away in storage, and let the new offensive coach get as pristine of a Caleb Williams as possible for next season, and give Bagent a game of experience again under his belt against a Packers team that might not be playing for much either, so who really cares? Like, that's a real question. I'd like to talk about it a little bit on the podcast this week. I don't know if there's enough there to debate or to devote a full episode about it, but I do want to get into the should they or should they not sit Caleb Williams debate, because I think there's a couple schools of thought on that I find myself going back and forth on what's realistic and what's not there. I think what I would ideally do is not the same as what's realistic to do there, and so I'd like to talk about that at some point this week on the podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen. If you're looking for a second listen, Don't forget to check out the Locked On NFL podcast with Tyler Rowland in the morning and Tony Wiggins in the afternoon. Comes out twice a day. I co-host on Tuesday morning podcasts with Tyler on Locked On NFL. So go check that out for some more coverage of the NFL as a whole. Coming back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity for you to bear down.